What if I told you that Mercedes found a way to cheat the system, right at the most important moment of the weekend, and that the FIA had to intervene urgently to stop them? Because this is not a simple technical detail. This is a direct blow to the heart of the classification in Formula One. While all the teams were playing under the same rules, Mercedes was exploiting a vacuum that gave them a brutal advantage just before crossing the finish line. An advantage that could decide poles, races, and even championships. But here comes the most shocking thing: it wasn't illegal, until the FIA decided it was. And now the big question is inevitable: how much of what we saw from Mercedes was real, and how much depended on this trick that has just been banned? Mercedes did not arrive at this situation by chance. It arrived because it understood before anyone else how to exploit one of the grayest areas of the 2026 regulations. In a Formula One completely transformed by the new hybrid regulations, where the power is divided practically 50% between the combustion engine and the electrical system, every detail in energy management has become a battlefield. And while most teams focused on optimizing efficiency within the obvious limits, Mercedes went a step further. It began to question how those rules were actually applied on the track. The regulations were clear in theory. At the end of the straights, the cars had to progressively reduce the MGUK's electrical power delivery to avoid peaks that compromised reliability and energy control. But there was a problem. That standard did not specify exactly how this reduction should be made, only that it should occur. And that's where Mercedes saw the opportunity. Instead of following the natural logic of a progressive reduction, they designed a system capable of completely cutting off the MGUK at the exact moment, just when the pilot was about to cross the finish line in qualifying. This movement changes everything because it breaks the fundamental principle of energy limitation. While other cars began to lose power in the last few meters, the Mercedes continued pushing with everything, until the last moment. It was not a constant improvement throughout the lap, it was something much more surgical, more precise. An advantage concentrated in the most critical point of all. And that in qualifying is pure gold, because you don't need to be faster in each corner, you just need to be faster at the exact moment that defines the time. The most striking thing is that this strategy had practically no cost in that context. The system was disabled for 60 seconds after the cut, yes. But what does that matter in classification? Absolutely nothing. The lap was already over, the time was already marked, and the car returned to the pit without needing to use the MGUK again. It was literally a free perk designed exclusively for Saturday. This is where suspicions began within the paddock. Because the data didn't add up. The differences in the final sectors, especially in the maximum speed zones, showed abnormal behavior in the Mercedes. It wasn't just that they were fast, it was how they delivered that speed in the final moment. And in an environment where every team analyzes every millimeter of telemetry, that kind of pattern doesn't go unnoticed. But Mercedes didn't stop there. At the same time, they were also pushing the limits on another equally critical front, the combustion engine. Taking advantage of another gray area in the regulations, they developed an internal system that allowed them to achieve a much higher compression ratio under real operating conditions. Although the official limit was 16:1, the hot behavior of the engine allowed them to operate closer to 18:1, generating an additional power gain that, combined with the MGUK trick, created an extremely competitive package. And this is where the problem escalates. Because we're no longer talking about a single creative interpretation of the regulation. We're talking about an entire concept designed to maximize every available loophole. Mercedes didn't just find a crack, it built an entire system around it. The result was immediate, a performance in qualifying that began to make real differences compared to its direct rivals. And when that happens in Formula One, the reaction is inevitable. The teams begin to look, to question, to put pressure. Because they know that if they do not understand what is happening, they are losing ground. And just at that moment, the story changes completely. The tension within the paddock did not explode immediately, but it was a matter of time. Because when a team begins to find performance in areas where the rest cannot explain where it comes from, Formula One goes into alert mode. And that was exactly what happened with Mercedes. The data began to speak, and what they said did not make sense under a normal interpretation of the regulations. Ferrari was one of the first to raise its hand. Not because they were simply suspicious, but because they had identified a clear pattern in the return endings. That extra push, that different behavior in the last meters, did not fit with the energy limitation imposed by the regulations. And in a sport where each team has access to advanced analysis tools, detecting such an anomaly is the start of something much bigger, a covert technical protest. From that moment on, what was technical genius began to become a political problem. because this was no longer just about performance, it was about equity. Other teams began to review their own data, to compare, to simulate, and they all came to the same conclusion. Mercedes was exploiting something that they were not using, or worse, something that they did not know if they could use without crossing the line. Pressure on the FIA grew rapidly. It was not an isolated complaint, it was a collective concern. And when several manufacturers with completely opposite interests agree on something, the FIA cannot look the other way. They had to make a decision. But it wasn't as simple as declaring the system illegal, because technically Mercedes wasn't breaking an explicit rule. They were interpreting it in an extreme way. And this is where the most delicate point of this entire conflict comes in. The FIA does not only act on what is illegal, it also acts on what it considers contrary to the spirit of the regulations. After reviewing the situation, analyzing the data, and understanding the real impact on the track, the FIA made a decisive decision to prohibit this type of management of the MGUK immediately, not through a retroactive sanction, but through a technical directive that closed the legal loophole that Mercedes had exploited. From that moment on, all equipment would be obliged to follow a progressive and controlled power delivery, without the possibility of sudden cuts that would alter the energy behavior of the system. This move completely changes the board, because Mercedes not only loses an advantage, it loses a key piece of its performance in qualifying. That extra tenth at the final moment disappears. That differential in critical sectors disappears. And most importantly, now they have to compete on equal terms at the point where they were making the most difference. But the blow is not only technical, it is also psychological. When a team is forced to modify a system in the middle of a season, the impact goes far beyond immediate performance. It affects confidence, alters development, changes the direction of internal work. Engineers who were focused on optimizing that system now have to rethink everything. And in a season where every week counts, losing that stability can be devastating. Meanwhile, the rest of the paddock watches and takes note. Because if Mercedes, one of the most technically advanced teams in history, has had to be stopped by the FIA, it means that the battle is no longer just about who develops better, but who interprets the regulations best without crossing the line. And now the great unknown begins to take shape. What will happen to Mercedes when that advantage completely disappears? And now is where everything becomes really dangerous for Mercedes, because when the FIA eliminates such a specific and decisive advantage, you are not only losing performance, you are revealing your true level. From this moment on, Mercedes enters a completely different new phase. They can no longer depend on that extra push in the last meters of the classification. They no longer have that final blow that covered up any small weakness in the rest of the lap. Now every sector counts, every curve matters, and that is where the reality of the car begins to be seen. The big question is immediate: how much of your ranking performance really depended on this system? Because if we talk about an estimated gain of up to 0.3 per lap, we are talking about a gigantic difference in current Formula One. 0.3 can mean going from pole position to the second or third row. And that changes everything: strategy, traffic, tire wear, opportunities in the race. It's not just a Saturday thing, it's a domino effect that impacts the entire weekend. And here the real structural problem appears. Mercedes had built part of its performance around this advantage. It was not an isolated extra, it was an integrated piece in the way he competed. By losing it, you not only lose time, you lose coherence in your package. This forces the team to react. But reacting in Formula One is not instantaneous. You can't just activate another solution overnight. Each change involves simulations, validations, adjustments on the track. Weeks of work that you don't have when the season is already underway. And while Mercedes tries to put itself back together, its rivals advance. Teams like Ferrari, McLaren, or Red Bull now know exactly where the difference was. And most importantly, they know it is no longer there. That changes everyone's mentality. Where they previously saw Mercedes as a difficult reference to reach in classification, they now see it as a vulnerable rival. But there is something even deeper that is starting to work against Mercedes: exposure. Because when a team is publicly stopped by the FIA, the message does not stay within the paddock. It becomes a narrative. It becomes media pressure, internal questioning, external doubts. Were they really the fastest, or simply the most ingenious at interpreting the rules? And that doubt is dangerous. Because in a sport where trust is everything, trust of the driver in the car, of the engineer in his decisions, of the team in his direction, any crack can grow quickly. If results start to fall after the ban, the narrative is confirmed. And when that happens, the blow is no longer technical, it is mental. Now Mercedes faces its most important test of the season. It's not a race, it's not a circuit. It's showing that they can remain competitive without that advantage. And in parallel, there is an even greater threat that is beginning to take shape. Because if they found a way to exploit the regulation once, the question is inevitable. Is it really all over? Or are there still more gray areas that we have not discovered? What we have seen with Mercedes is not a simple case of going to the limit. It is the perfect example of how far a team can go when it understands the regulations better than anyone else. Because they weren't breaking the rules. They were playing with them, bending them, taking them to a point where the line between legal and questionable practically disappears. But Formula One has an invisible limit. And that limit is the moment in which the FIA decides to intervene. Banning this trick doesn't just eliminate a technical advantage, it eliminates an entire philosophy of how Mercedes was approaching qualifying. It takes away that final blow that could decide a pole, forces them to rebuild part of their performance, and above all, it exposes them to all their rivals. Let me know in the comments what you think about all this.